Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, a new leader for the Palestinian movement Hamas. Ismail Haniyeh is seen as a relative moderate at a time the group seeks to end its international isolation. A water crisis in Gaza is putting Palestinian lives at risk, with only an estimated 4% suitable for drinking. Plus, without school, the children of Mosul are feared lost to poverty and conflict. Thousands are now returning after parts of the city are recaptured from the Islamic State group. But first, to the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas, which elected Ismail Haniyeh to head its political office. The 54-year-old is a former deputy chief and will replace Qatar-based veteran Khaled Mashal. The leadership changes come as Hamas looks to reconcile with Palestinian rivals at a time the group also appears to have softened its stance towards Israel. Alison Sargent brings you the story.
He's the new face of Hamas. And unlike his predecessor, who lives exiled in Qatar, Ismail Haniyeh will lead from Gaza, a meaningful change for its inhabitants.
Someone who lives in Gaza shares the feeling with its residents. He sees the electricity blackout, he sees the crises, he sees the slashing of salaries. He doesn't just hear about them.
Haniyeh was born and raised in a Gaza refugee camp. He joined Hamas as the first intifada was erupting in the late 1980s and was imprisoned several times by Israeli authorities. Haniyeh rose to prominence in the group as the right-hand man of Hamas founder and spiritual leader Sheikh Yassin. In 2006, the group won a shock electoral victory over their rival Fatah, the Western-backed authority led by Mahmoud Abbas. Haniyeh was named prime minister, but political deadlock devolved into armed conflict between the two groups. Hamas seized control of Gaza in 2007. 3 successive wars with Israel followed, weakening the movement and the position of its hardliners in particular. Haniyeh's election is seen as an embodiment of the group's recent shift toward pragmatism. Just days before, Hamas adopted a new charter. For the first time, it accepts a Palestinian state with pre-1967 borders and drops the long-standing demand for the destruction of Israel.
It's very important for everyone to know that this document did not come as a result of pressures from any side. It's the result of the preparations of this movement through the past 4 years.
Haniyeh's softer tone is balanced by another new appointment. Sitting next to him is the new local leader for Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, one of the group's most hardline figures.
Staying with Palestinians, those in Gaza remember a time when almost everyone could drink clean water from the tap. Now, less than 4% of fresh water is drinkable, and the surrounding sea is polluted by sewage. That's according to a report published by Oxfam International. This is one of the many reasons why the United Nations says that Gaza could be uninhabitable by 2020.
From the sky, it's a postcard-perfect scenery. Long stretches of sand and turquoise water, a surfer's paradise. But under the surface, the green and opaque water is filled with trash and health-threatening particles.
The water's extremely polluted. I regularly get skin diseases and sometimes even respiratory problems.
The situation has become a humanitarian emergency for the Palestinian enclave, which could, according to the UN, become uninhabitable by 2020. Higher up the coast, the black wastewater flows directly into the sea, contaminating the shore and seeping into the nearly empty underground water table. The poor quality of the untreated drinking water, regularly tested, is undisputable.
It goes down. It's worse every time.
Over 90% of the water available in Gaza is unfit for domestic use, a level of contamination visible to the naked eye. Here on the right, a sample of clean drinking water. On the left, local tap water, clearly contaminated.
Look, red. All the results are in the red. There's iron, bromide, strontium, chromium.
The bacterial and chemical pollution of water supplies is causing more and more Gazans to fall ill. But contaminated water is still regularly used, including for agricultural purposes. It's a devastating health crisis in this territory already severely damaged by war and where 40% of the population is unemployed. In January, the largest desalination plant in Gaza partially opened with the help of international aid. Once at full capacity, it will supply 75,000 people with safe water, a much-needed first step for the area's 2 million inhabitants.
Moving on to the presidential election here in France, which wrapped up on Sunday with a historic win for the youngest leader since Napoleon. Emmanuel Macron, a relative unknown, beat the far-right's Marine Le Pen, attracting 66% of the vote. Political heavyweights were quick to send congratulatory messages to France's new president-elect. One message, which attracted a great deal of attention, came from Bana al-Abed, a 7-year-old refugee from Syria whose Twitter posts have offered a tragic account of the conflict in the country, turning her into an international celebrity.
Dear President, do something for the children of the world. Think of their education and life. Every child must go to school. Thank you.
In other world news, for the first time in more than 2 years, thousands of children are returning to school after Iraqi special forces and army units liberated the eastern half of Mosul, fearing they would be indoctrinated and sent to fight by the Islamic State group. Many other parents took them out of school. According to the United Nations, returning these children to school is a priority for Iraq to end the cycle of sectarian violence, fueled in part by poverty and ignorance. Julia Seeger has the story.
Thousands of kids wandering in the streets of Mosul. Many have been orphaned or left homeless by the war. They're now forced to scavenge through garbage, looking for food or spare parts. Huzaifa is 11 years old and already works as a mechanic in a car shop. His school closed the day the Islamic State group captured the city in June 2014.
I studied up to the 5th grade, but stopped after the Islamic State group came. They taught us how to add with bullets and how to fire weapons.
Further down the road, Fala is selling vegetables on the market. He's 12 years old and has 4 younger brothers. None of them have ever attended school. Their parents feared the Islamic State group would try to enroll them.
I was afraid that they would ask me to join them as a fighter, as many others did.
In the eastern part of Mosul, recaptured by Iraqi troops in January, 3 institutions out of 4 have reopened. Most classes have at least doubled in size due to displaced people from West Mosul and surrounding villages. In this refugee camp 100 kilometers away, many pupils are traumatized after they were forced to attend schools run by IS militants, a curriculum based on jihadi content aimed at brainwashing students.
We need the support of the Ministry of Education to rehabilitate students and help them forget previous experiences, to then enable them to absorb the scientific material and keep on with their studies.
Meanwhile, the western part of the city is still under the control of the Islamic State group. More than 3 million children still haven't returned to their classroom nationwide, an issue that has become the government's #1 priority.
Next to Egypt, once a flourishing community, only a handful of Egyptian Jews, mostly elderly women, is all that remains in the Arab world's most populous country, and they are desperately trying to preserve their heritage.
In this Cairo synagogue, Magda Haroun shows centuries-old Torah scrolls kept inside the Ark, a small piece of Egypt's vanishing Jewish heritage. Between 80,000 and 120,000 Jews lived in the country until the mid-20th century. Today, only 18 remain.
Our numbers used to be bigger. But because of the old age of our members, at least 2 or 3 of them die every year.
Magda is president of Cairo's Jewish community, tasked with helping to preserve its heritage. She's one of only 6 Jews living in the Egyptian capital. At 91 years old, her mother, Marcel, dreads to see centuries of Jewish history fade.
très affecté.
It really affects me. And it makes me sad. But there's nothing I can do. It's too late.
Many Egyptian Jews left or were forced out following the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Amir Ramses made a 2013 documentary on the community. Screening the film in Cairo cinemas was a struggle before he eventually obtained clearance.
A lot of people still consider that we're in a state of political animosity with Israel, and some still mix the words Jew and Israeli because of that. But I can say that this situation is changing. Little by little, some people are starting to differentiate between Jewish people and those who belong to a state with which there could be a political struggle.
Officially, the government makes no distinction between Pharaonic, Islamic, Coptic and Jewish heritage. And the Antiquities Minister says he set up a committee in 2016 to list all Jewish monuments.
All antiquities have the same importance for us because they all belong to the Egyptian civilization.
But some of the country's synagogues, like this one in the coastal city of Alexandria, need restoration. Although Egyptian Jews have been spared recent attacks targeting Christians, many prefer to keep a low profile, hoping to preserve for a little while longer their once flourishing community.
We end with Iran, where a student who bears an uncanny resemblance to Lionel Messi has been causing a stir on the streets of the Iranian city of Hamadan and now the capital, Tehran. Reza Paraster has been mobbed by fans and selfie seekers since he donned the number 10 Barcelona shirt as suggested by his father. But things got a little bit messy for the lookalike when police briefly took him to the station and impounded his car to stop what they called public disturbance. Well, that's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. Don't forget you can follow us on social media. That's both Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching France 24.